I have told this story to no one, not to my ministers, not to the 3 senior court matrons who have served me since my own nomming day, not to the grief attendants who were brought in from the outer provinces at a cost that would have floated a naval detachment for a year. I have told no one, because telling it would require me to explain what I felt standing in that corridor, and I am not yet certain I have words for it that are equal to the thing itself. My daughter Saravain stopped speaking on the 43rd day after her father died. I remember the exact day because I had made a note in my morning record, a habit left over from my time in the administrative colleges before I became Empress, when I still believed that nomming a thing precisely was a way of holding it still. The note said, Day 43. The heir has not spoken since the morning meal. Attendants report she ate 4 bites. I had written it in my own hand, in the careful small script I use for things I do not wish the secretarial office to see, and then I had folded the paper into my sleeve and carried it with me all day without knowing why. 43 days after Save died, our daughter stopped talking. She was 9 years old. I want to be careful here, because Saravain's grief is hers, not mine to describe for you as though it were a symptom I observed. What I can tell you, what any honest record of what happened in the Essen-vor citadel over the following 4 years must acknowledge, is what we tried, and what failed, and in what order. The first attendants were the senior nursery staff. Braith Orvan, who attended the heir since her 2nd year and who was, by every measure I have, a woman of patience and genuine warmth. Saravain had loved her once. After Save died, the child would not be touched by her, would not be in the same room. Braith asked me quietly whether she should simply wait it out, sit outside the chamber door, available, not pressing. We tried that for 11 weeks. Saravain ate less and less, slept in fragments, woke crying and silent. The crying without sound was the part that undid Braith. She came to me one morning, her own eyes wet, and told me she was making it worse. I thanked her and sent her home to her family. She had served us for 14 years. I watched her collect her things from the nursery anteroom in a small bundled square of cloth, the same cloth she'd carried when she arrived, and she was so careful about it. The way she folded each item, the way she set the room precisely as she'd found it, that I had to step into the corridor to get my face under control before she saw me. I did not want her to spend her last hour worrying about me. She had enough to carry. The second wave were the grief specialists. The essen-vor court has a protocol for royal mourning. There are 4 ranks of grief attendants, each trained in a different method, each certificated by the Council of the Interior. The first rank attempted physical proximity protocols, a technique that involves simply remaining present in the child's visual field, making no demands, allowing the child to control all interaction. Saravain ignored them with a completeness that would have been impressive if it had not frightened me so badly. She would sit in the same room as them for hours and look directly past them, as though the wall behind them were slightly more interesting. The second rank worked with sound, low tonal instruments, resonance chambers built into the walls of the supplementary nursery we had cleared for the purpose. The heir sat through 3 sessions with her hands over her ears and her eyes shut. The third rank used what they called narrative grief work, which involved telling stories about the figure who had been lost, inviting the child to add to them. Saravain left the room the first time one of them said her father's name. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply stood up with the careful deliberateness of someone who has decided something, and she went through the inner nursery door, and she did not come back out until dinner. The fourth rank, the senior counselors, told me that the child was not ready to be reached, and that forcing proximity was likely to cause lasting damage to her capacity for attachment. They were not unkind about it. They were probably correct. They recommended patience. I have never been good at patience. I became Empress by being faster and more precise than everyone who doubted me, and patience felt at the time like a word people used when they did not know what else to do. I understand now that there is a kind of patience that is not waiting but watching, That is keeping yourself available without requiring anything of the other person. I did not understand it then. I kept trying to fix the thing. Over the next 3 years, I brought in 11 more specialists. I consulted with the physicians of the allied houses on 3 other inhabited worlds. I read every paper on childhood grief and selective withdrawal that the academic archives contained, and I underlined the passages that seemed relevant in 4 different colors, which is what I do when I am frightened and need to feel like I am doing something. I spoke with other parents who had lost a partner. I spoke with adults who had lost a parent in childhood. I had conversations that I will not recount here because they do not belong to this record. They belong to those people who gave me their honesty and confidence. None of it reached my daughter. I want to pause here and tell you what those years were like to live, because I think any honest account of what finally happened has to include it. I am not a person who is easily made to feel helpless. I was trained from early girlhood to understand that most problems have solutions, that the correct application of attention and resource and will can alter almost any situation in the direction you want, and that the principal difference between a leader and a bystander is the refusal to accept that a given situation is fixed. I believe this. I believe it still, with most of what I govern. You do not run 4 inhabited worlds by deciding things cannot be changed. But there is a particular kind of helplessness that arrives when the thing you are trying to change is a person, when the situation you want to alter is inside someone you love, and they did not ask to be altered, and your love and your resource and your will are not the correct tools for it. And the harder you press, the more clearly you can see this, and you cannot stop pressing because the alternative is doing nothing, and the doing nothing feels like abandonment. I lived in that specific helplessness for 4 years. I have never told anyone that, not in those terms. I am telling it here because the record demands it. The nights were the worst of it, not the governing I could do, and it helped, the way any useful work helps when everything else is uncertain. The nights were where the full shape of it arrived. I would lie in the large room that Save and I had shared, which I had not changed because changing it seemed like a capitulation to the fact that he was gone, and I would run through the current plan. Whatever the current specialist was attempting, whatever the current approach, and I would find myself, by the time the night was far enough along, simply counting backward from whatever I had tried to whatever had failed, and the list was long and getting longer. I am not, I think, a person who requires sympathy for this. I made the same calculations any parent makes, and I made them under conditions of more support than most parents have. What I want to convey is the specific quality of the helplessness, because it is relevant to what came later. It was not the helplessness of having no options. I had options. I kept exercising them. It was the helplessness of discovering that the thing you want cannot be reached by any action you are capable of, that it requires something from you that you do not have, or have not learned, or cannot supply, because the act of supplying it requires you to be a different person than the one you are. I did not know then what that something was. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon in a corridor. One specialist, a woman from one of the allied worlds, who had a long record of working with bereaved royal children, and who came with the highest possible endorsements, spent 6 weeks with Saravane before she told me, with the particular directness I had come to respect from people who are not afraid of delivering difficult assessments, that she thought the child was forming what she called a reflexive rejection pattern. That every person who arrived with the explicit goal of helping her was being identified and categorized and turned away, not out of hostility, but out of some very deep and very quiet refusal to be managed. She had started to recognize the posture of a person who had been sent to help her, and recognition was the same as dismissal. The woman told me this over a pot of tea in my private study, and I listened to all of it, and I thanked her, and I asked her what to do about it, and she looked at me with the honest compassion of someone who does not have a good answer and is not going to pretend otherwise, and said, "I don't know. I'm sorry." I remember thinking, after she left, that I had just paid the equivalent of a provincial governor's annual salary for someone to confirm what Braith Orvan had told me for free in the first month. She ate, she slept, she was physically well. She attended the formal instruction sessions required by her station, language, mathematics, the early political theory that all heirs begin at 10. She was attentive in those classes in a way that reminded me of myself at her age, focused, accurate, almost mechanical. She answered questions correctly. She did not volunteer anything that was not asked of her. When I held her, she permitted it. She would put her arms around my neck when I embraced her, and she would stay there as long as I held on, but she did not press back against me, did not hold me the way she once had. It was like holding someone who was very far away. I want to be precise about that too, because I know what it cost me to admit it, even here, even in a record no one will read until I am gone. Holding my daughter and feeling her there but absent, that was the specific shape of my grief in those years. Not the absence of save, not the governing alone, the state ceremonies conducted without him at my right hand, the meals taken in rooms he had made warm simply by being in them. Those things were heavy and real. But they were my grief, and I knew what to do with my grief, more or less. I had resources. I had work. I had 4 planets worth of people depending on me to function, and that dependency, which could have been a weight, was also a rope I could hold onto when the current was strongest. What I could not fix was Saravane, and that was the weight that did not shift. I have told you all of this because I want you to understand the context in which I saw what I saw in that corridor. The refugee labor intake had been running for about 8 months by the time Ren Falca was assigned to the inner citadel maintenance rotation. The program was not a large one. We had room for perhaps 60 families at a time, housed in the outer keep's residential wing, given work inside the palace complex in exchange for documented residency and a path toward formal resettlement status. Most of the workers went to the gardens, the kitchens, the laundry, the outer courtyard maintenance. The inner citadel, the nurseries, the private corridors, the family wing received only those who had completed a full security clearance cycle, which took most of the first year. Ren Falca was one of 11 workers who had cleared by the end of the 8th month. I did not know his name then. I did not know any of their names. That is not an excuse, only a fact about the nature of large institutions, which process people through categories rather than particulars. He was on the maintenance manifest as R. Falca, Sector 7, assigned to the nursery anteroom and the corridor of the family wing's eastern approach. He had been given a cart, a mop, a set of floor treatment solutions, a schedule, and a key chip that unlocked the appropriate doors during the approved hours. On the day in question, I was walking the eastern corridor at a time I did not usually walk it. I had a meeting canceled. The interior minister had sent word that he needed another day to prepare his figures, and I had an unaccustomed hour in the middle of the afternoon with nothing required of me. I had not eaten properly since the morning, and I thought I would walk to the family kitchen and see what was available. The eastern corridor is the most direct route. I heard the sound before I reached the turn. It was not music precisely. Or rather, it was music in the way that a man humming to himself while he works is music, shapeless, tuneless in any formal sense, following no melody I could identify. It rose and fell with the rhythm of what his hands were doing, which was mopping the floor in long strokes with the particular patient economy of a person who has done this same task many times and no longer has to think about it. There was a low, guttural quality to it, almost subvocal, the kind of sound a person makes when they are alone and their mind is somewhere else entirely. I stopped at the turn. I stopped because I heard something else underneath the humming. It took me a moment to identify it. When I did, I held myself very still against the wall. It was my daughter. She was sitting on the floor at the far end of the corridor, just outside the inner nursery door, with her knees drawn up and her back against the wall, and she was crying. She was crying the way she had cried since her father died, without sound, with just the movement of her shoulders and the wetness on her face. She had not noticed the worker. Or she had noticed him and had decided, in the particular economy of a grieving 9-year-old, that he was not a threat and not a person who required anything of her. The worker, Ren Falke, though I did not know his name yet, had his back to her. He was working his way along the opposite wall, section by section, the mop going out and coming back in those long practice strokes. He had not noticed her. Then he did. He paused, just a half-second, the mop going still in his hands, his head turning slightly. Then he went back to mopping. He did not call out. He did not set the mop against the wall and approach her. He did not crouch down to her level with the particular concerned lean that every trained attendant and grief specialist adopts when they approach a distressed child. The lean I had watched 11 different specialists perform, and which Saravain had responded to by either ignoring them or leaving. He did not do any of those things. He kept mopping and he kept humming. And very gradually, over the next several minutes, without stopping what he was doing, he worked his way along the corridor toward the end where she was sitting. I did not move. I became part of the wall. I was aware with some corner of my attention that I was Empress of 4 inhabited worlds and that I was currently pressed flat against a palace corridor wall with my breath held, watching a refugee janitor mop a floor, and that if any of my ministers could see me they would have had complicated feelings about this. I did not care. I did not move. He reached the section of floor near her. He was perhaps 2 arm lengths away. He turned his back to the wall and started working the floor in front of him, facing outward, and she was in his peripheral vision, but he was not looking at her. The humming continued. She watched him. I could see her face from where I stood. She had stopped crying, or rather the crying had quieted into something else. She was watching him the way my daughter watches things when she is actually present inside herself. Not the mechanical attentiveness she used in lessons, but the real attention she used to pay to things that interested her when she was younger. She was watching his hands on the mop. She was watching the pattern of the clean floor spreading behind him. I watched her watch him, and I noticed the thing that I had not been able to name for 4 years, the exact quality of what was different, and it was this. He had not arrived. Most people arrive when they enter a space where Saravain is. They arrive with their awareness of her, with their management of that awareness, with the particular weight that a child who has been grieving for 4 years places on the people around her, whether she means to or not. Even I arrive, with my love and my worry and my careful attention. He was simply there. He had been there before she came into the corridor, doing what he was doing, and she had come into the space he was already in, and he had registered her and continued, and that continuation was the thing. He was not adjusting himself for her. She was not a situation requiring handling. She was a child at the end of the corridor, and he was a man with a mop, and the floor needed doing. She said something. I did not hear it. She had spoken too quietly, and the corridor has a particular acoustic. It swallows soft sounds. But I saw her mouth move, and I saw the worker pause again. He looked at her directly for the first time. He said something back. I could not hear that either. She said something more. He tilted his head the way you do when you want to hear better. He said something. She almost smiled, not quite. The muscles of her face moved in that direction and then stopped, and she looked at the floor he'd cleaned and said something else. He leaned on the mop and talked to her for perhaps 4 minutes. I cannot tell you what they said. I did not hear it. What I can tell you is the quality of it. The way a conversation has a texture you can read even at distance, even in silence. It was not careful. It was not the kind of talk that is shaped around a person's grief, that is conscious of itself, that chooses each word with an awareness of what the child has been through and what she needs to hear. It was just talk. The offhand, unguarded kind. The kind that happens when 2 people have nothing in particular at stake with each other, and are therefore not trying. I watched my daughter have an ordinary conversation with a stranger for the first time in 4 years. Then the child's face changed. Something moved through it, some arrival of the thing that had been absent, and her chin dropped and her shoulders went up and she put her hands over her eyes and she cried. This time there was sound. Not loud, but there, actual sound, audible grief, the real kind that had not been available to her since the 43rd day. It startled me. I want to be honest. It startled me the way a sudden noise startles you, a physical flinch, and I put my hand over my mouth and held it there. 4 years of that silence and then the sound of it, muffled by her hands and small in the corridor's long reach, was so enormous that for a moment I could not see clearly. He set the mop against the wall. He did not crouch down in the trained lean. He sat down on the floor beside her, not close, an arm's length off, the way you sit beside someone you know without crowding them, and he was quiet for a moment. He looked at the wall. He was not performing patience. He was just a man sitting on a floor, being present, not requiring anything. And then he started humming again. The same shapeless non-melody. The same low, guttural rhythm that had no business being in a citadel corridor, that belonged more properly to a machine bay or a long work shift somewhere practical and unglamorous. He hummed it, and she cried, and then she cried less, and then she leaned sideways and put her head against his arm. He put his hand on her shoulder. I have thought about that gesture more times than I can count since that afternoon. The hand going from his knee to her shoulder, no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the movement of a man who has done this before, who has sat on a floor with someone small and sad, and known without thinking about it where his hand was supposed to go. It was not a formal touch. It was not a therapeutic touch, which is a specific thing that trained attendants do with awareness of their hands and awareness of the response. It was a father's touch, the hand of someone who had a daughter and had loved her and had sat on floors with her. I found out later that he had. I will come to that. Our court has protocols governing physical contact between ranked persons and household staff. These protocols are ancient and exist for good reasons that I will not rehearse here. They are also, like all ancient protocols, entirely inadequate to most of the situations that actually arise within them. I had signed the relevant amendments 3 times in my tenure. I would think about them again after that afternoon. She did not startle. She did not stiffen. She pulled her knees a little tighter to her chest, and she kept her head against his arm, and she cried properly, for the first time in 4 years, audibly and thoroughly, the way grief is supposed to move when it is allowed to. I did not cry. I am telling you this not because I think it reflects well on me, but because it is accurate. I stood in that corridor and I watched my daughter be reached by a man with a mop and oil-rough hands and a tuneless work song, and I did not cry. I think I was too still for it. I think there is a particular stillness that arrives when something you have been holding yourself against for a very long time suddenly resolves, when the tension that has been holding you upright abruptly has nothing to push against, and in that stillness everything goes quiet and the tears, which would have been appropriate, simply do not come. They come later. They came later for me, much later in my own chamber alone, which is where I do that. I stayed in the corridor until Saravane had quieted and the worker had gone back to his mop. She sat with her eyes closed and her back against the wall, not sleeping, just resting. He worked in silence for a while. Then she got up, went to the nursery door and went inside. He watched her go. Then he noticed me. He turned to collect his supply cart, and I was simply there, at the far end of the corridor, and his face went through several things in rapid succession. The color that leaves a person's face when they realize they are in a situation that could go very badly. The particular stillness of someone calculating whether they have done something wrong and not yet knowing the answer. He was a tall man. I want to describe him because he matters, and I want him to be real in this account. Broad across the shoulders in the way of someone who has done physical work for most of his adult life, with a face that was neither old nor young but had been lived in, with the particular quality that some faces have of being more honest than their owner intends. Gray at the temples, hands that looked like hands that had repaired things. He wore the standard refugee intake work uniform, which is undistinguished, and he was holding the mop in both hands with a grip that had gone slightly rigid. He inclined his head, the standard deference. Then he said, in the careful formal register that the intake orientation teaches all refugee workers, "Your Imperium, forgive the intrusion, I can return to this section at a different hour." His accent was from somewhere far south and west, one of the outer territories' dialects that I cannot precisely place. The formal register cost him some effort, I could hear it, the careful choosing of the approved words. I said, "You did not intrude." He was quiet. He did not quite know what to do with that, I think. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at me. I said, "How long have you been in the intake program?" 8 months, he said, coming on 9. "Where were you before?" "The Vassal Transit Station," he said. "Before that, Outer Reach. Before that," he paused, decided something. "Before that, home, but that was a long while ago." "What did you do at home?" He looked at me with the expression of a man who is trying to determine whether this is the sort of conversation that can be had honestly or whether he should be careful. He decided, apparently, that it could be had honestly. "I repaired things," he said. "Mostly industrial mining equipment, cargo haulers, some of the smaller atmospheric vessels, whatever was broken and needed not to be." "How long?" "Since I was about 17, so," he did a brief calculation, 37 years. I looked at him, "And you ended up here." He met my eyes and did not apologize for this fact, which I respected. "And I ended up here," he agreed. I was trying to decide how to ask the thing I wanted to ask, which was how he had known what to do, how he had known to keep mopping, not to approach, to sit on the floor rather than crouch, to hum rather than speak, to put his hand on her shoulder instead of offering it, or patting her head, or saying the things that people say. I am good at constructing questions, but I could not find the shape of this one in formal language, and after a moment I abandoned the attempt and asked it plainly. "Where did you learn to do what you did?" I said. He understood immediately what I meant. He did not pretend otherwise or ask for clarification. "My daughter," he said. He told me briefly, without much decoration. He had a daughter named Yeva. He had raised her alone from the time she was 4. Her mother had died, an illness, one of the outer territory strains that the medical system out there manages but does not always cure. Yeva had been, in his words, a difficult child to reach after that. Not in a pathological way, he said quickly, correcting himself. She had been a perfectly healthy child, just quiet in the way that children who have lost someone become quiet, the way they close a certain door inside themselves as a protection. He had learned, over years of raising her, that trying to open that door was the wrong approach. The door opened when it opened. His job was to be on the other side of it when it did. He did not frame this as wisdom. He said it the way you say things you have learned by necessity and cannot put any other way. Matter-of-factly, the way you might explain the correct torque for a particular fitting. "This is the thing, it works like this. There is no better approach that I have found." He said she was grown now. She had resettled 2 years ago with a certification in technical repair, following him into the trade. He had not seen her in 14 months because of the transit restrictions. He had a communication from her every few weeks when the relay was working, which it was not always. He told me all of this in the same direct, undramatic way that he had answered my earlier questions. The way of a person who has made peace with the facts of his own life and does not require anyone else to mourn them on his behalf. I said, "She is well." "Last I heard," he said, "last I heard she was." There was a silence. I said, "I want to offer you a permanent position in the inner Citadel maintenance staff. The same work, better quarters in the residential annex, full residency status, not intake, you would not need to renew, and the transit restriction waiver that comes with a permanent court appointment, which would allow you to arrange a visit from your daughter." He looked at the mop in his hands. He looked at the floor he had just cleaned. He looked at me. "I'd rather keep my current assignment," he said. I was not expecting this. Not because I assumed he would accept. I have made enough offers to enough people to know that gratitude and acceptance are different things. But because I had offered specifically the things that seemed to address what he had told me, and I had assumed that addressing those things precisely was the same as addressing his needs. I said, the transit waiver in particular. I know what it means, he said. I'm grateful for the thought. He paused. He was not being ungracious. He was being careful, I think, not to explain himself in a way that would sound like a refusal of something given with good intent. The intake program has a specific track, he said. I'm 8 months into it. 9 almost. If I shift to a different appointment now, I start over on some of the documentation. There are 4 other people on my documentation track who are waiting for a reference from a supervisor who knows their work. If I leave the track, it complicates their filing. He said this simply, as a fact, not as a virtue. He was not telling me he was being noble. He was describing an actual logistical situation. We can accommodate that, I said. The documentation can be transferred. It's not only the documentation, he said, and then he stopped. I waited. I am not, he started. He seemed to be measuring his words not for courtesy but for accuracy. I am not the right person for a permanent position in this part of the building. I don't mean that badly. I mean that what happened today was, he looked at the end of the corridor where Saravane had gone. That was a Tuesday afternoon. I was cleaning the floor. I am good at cleaning floors. That's the thing I'm actually good at. Putting me somewhere more official than that seems like it might be. He used a word from his outer territories dialect that I had to reconstruct from context. It meant, approximately, a solution looking for a problem that has already been solved. I looked at him. He said, she knows I'm here. I'll be back on Thursday, that's enough. There was a quality to the silence that followed that I can only describe as being in the presence of something that does not require anything of you, which is rarer than it should be in the life I lead. Most silences want something from me, a decision, a word, a signature, a dissolution of tension. This silence was simply itself. I said, all right. He inclined his head again. He picked up his supply cart. He walked back toward the section of floor he had not finished, and he began again with the mop, and inside 3 seconds he was humming. I stood there for another moment. Then I went to the kitchen and found something to eat, and I ate it alone at the small staff table by the window that looks out over the eastern garden, and I thought about nothing in particular, which is something I rarely get to do. I am going to tell you the rest of it now, because the rest of it belongs in this account, even though it is quieter than the afternoon in the corridor. Ren Falca came back on Thursday, as he said he would. He came back the following Monday and Thursday after that, and the Monday and Thursday after that. The inner Citadel maintenance rotation is twice a week on those days, and Saravane began to arrange herself near wherever he was working. I learned this from Braith Orvan, who had remained in the household in a different role and who noticed things as a matter of professional habit. She told me about it matter-of-factly, without the particular delicacy that people use when they bring me information they're afraid might upset me. I was grateful for that. Braith told me what she observed, and she observed it without interfering. Saravane would appear in the corridor when she heard the supply cart. She would sit in the anteroom while he worked the adjoining floor. She did not follow him exactly. She did not trail behind him, which would have been a different thing, but she arranged herself in proximity, and he neither encouraged it nor discouraged it. He worked. She watched. After a few weeks she began to talk. Not to me at first, and not to the attendants, and not in the formal instruction sessions, though those had always received her mechanical participation. She began to talk to Ren Falca while he worked. Braith told me she asked him technical questions, what the floor treatment solution was made of, how the cart mechanism worked, whether different stone surfaces required different methods. He answered her, apparently, with the same directness he had used with me. No performance, no special management, just the actual answers to the actual questions. He showed her once, Braith said, how to test a floor surface for absorption rate before applying the treatment, which was apparently a detail that made a practical difference to the quality of the result, and Saravane had been riveted. Braith described this to me with the careful neutrality of a person who has watched someone she loves very much slowly return from somewhere far away, and does not want to make too much of any particular milestone for fear of startling it off. She told me in the corridor one evening, quietly, standing in the doorway of my study rather than coming in. She said, "The air speaks to him." And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and we did not say anything else about it because there was nothing else to say. By the second month she was helping him. This is not a formal arrangement, I want to be clear about that. It is not a protocol or a planned therapeutic activity. She simply began to appear when he arrived and to assist with parts of the work that she could assist with without getting in the way. He let her. He corrected her technique once or twice, Braith said, in the same offhand way he answered questions, not making a ceremony of it, and she accepted the corrections and applied them. She began to eat properly. I noticed this first at the morning meal, where she had for 4 years pushed food around her plate in a performance of eating that I had been too frightened to challenge. The performance had been meticulous. She moved things from one side of the plate to the other with great care, and occasionally put something in her mouth and chewed it, and she had learned precisely how much a plate needed to be disturbed to satisfy the attendants who were responsible for nodding her intake. I had watched this and said nothing, because pushing her produced nothing, and I was afraid that making a point of it would close something I needed to remain open. One morning she finished everything and asked for more. I kept my face composed and told the attendant to bring it. She ate that too. That evening she told me, without prompting, that she had been hungry all day, which she said as though it were a slightly surprising piece of information about herself, something she had just noticed. I said that I was glad, and she looked at me with a slightly puzzled expression, as though hunger were a new phenomenon that she had not previously registered as something that could be gladsome or not, and then she said, "Yes, I suppose it is better than not being hungry." And that small, ordinary sentence, which is the kind of thing children say all the time and which I would not have remarked on before any of this, stayed in my chest all day like something warm. She began to sleep through to morning. This took longer. The sleep was where the worst of it had always lived, the waking at strange hours, the crying in the dark that the night attendants reported but that she never spoke of in the daytime. One morning Braith told me the heir had slept without waking, and I said nothing because I did not trust my voice. And Braith, who has known me for many years, simply moved on to the next item of business as though nothing had happened, which was the correct and generous thing to do. I do not know exactly when she began to speak to me again. It was gradual, the way most things that matter are gradual. There is never a clean moment of before and after that you can point to, only the accumulation of small thresholds that you notice in retrospect. One morning she said something at the meal table that was not in response to a question. One afternoon she came to my office doorway and stood there until I looked up, and she asked if she could stay while I worked. Not talking, just in the room, and I said of course, and she came in and sat with a book for an hour and then went to bed. One evening she told me something small, something about a calculation she had worked out in her mathematics instruction that had surprised her. And the telling of it was the old telling, the one from before, with the slight animation in her face that I had not seen in so long I had forgotten the exact quality of it. I did not make a production of any of this. I took it as it came. There were bad days still, and bad weeks, and weeks where she went back to a version of the absence. I had learned by then not to rush those weeks, not to send for anyone, not to do anything except be available and continue to function. On the bad days she helped with the maintenance and did not talk, and on the days between she was more and more simply herself. I was learning slowly the patience that is not waiting but watching. I was learning it from a man who would be surprised to know he had taught me anything. In the 5th month, Ren Falca came to the end of his intake documentation track. He received his formal resettlement status and a residency certificate. I saw his name on the weekly processing list that the intake office sends to my desk for review, and I paused on it the way you pause on a name you recognize in an unexpected context. I had the transit waiver processed separately and added to his file without telling him. It is within my authority to do this. I did not tell him because I did not want him to feel that a conversation he had not invited had produced a debt he had not agreed to. If he chose to use it, he would discover it when he arranged the travel. He used it 4 months later. Braith told me, in the same matter-of-fact way she told me the other things. His daughter Yeva came for a 2-week visit. She was in her late 20s, Braith said, with her father's build and a technical worker's hands and a manner that was direct in the same way his was, though where his directness was quiet hers was apparently more ready to talk. Sarah Vane met her. This was not arranged. She simply appeared, as she had taken to appearing where Wren was, and after some initial assessment of each other, the two of them spent most of an afternoon talking about technical repair methods, which apparently Yeva was delighted to discuss, and Sarah Vane had developed a considerable new interest in. I would have liked to have seen that. I did not see it. I heard about it from Braith, and I held it in mind all day afterward with a feeling that I did not immediately have a name for, and that I eventually identified as something very close to joy, which is not a feeling that has come easily to me in recent years. Sarah Vane is 12 now. She is not a healed child, if that is what you are hopping, I will tell you. She is a child who has learned to carry something heavy and to move with it, which is a different thing and in some ways a harder thing, and I am prouder of her for it than I am able to say. She still has quiet weeks where she goes back to a version of that absence, and in those weeks she helps with the floor maintenance and does not talk much, and I leave her to it. In the weeks between she is my daughter. The one I have been trying to reach for 4 years. The one I was reaching toward with every specialist and every reading and every colored underline in every clinical paper, and could not find, until a man with a mop and a tuneless song sat on a floor beside her and did not require anything. I am going to say something that will sound like a simple thing, but that cost me a certain amount to arrive at, so I want to say it plainly. What Wren Falke did that afternoon was not a mystery. It was not a gift from outside the natural order. It was not a talent granted to him by some specific quality of his character that other people did not have. He had learned it. He had learned it over years, alone with a small, sad child in whatever quarters they were living in at the time, the outer reaches, a transit station, wherever, and he had learned it because he had to, because there was no one else to figure it out, and because the thing he was trying to figure out mattered more to him than anything else. He had learned to sit on floors. He had learned to hum. He had learned the particular quality of presence that asks nothing, and therefore gives something that cannot be given any other way. I think about the specialists I hired. They were not failures. Several of them were people of genuine skill and care. The methods they used were real methods, developed over real research and real practice. But they arrived with something that Wren Falke did not have, which was an awareness of what they were there to do. They arrived in the role of people who were going to reach my daughter, and she felt that role, and she did what distressed children do with intentions aimed at them. She refused it. He arrived to clean a floor. He has never, in any of the conversations I have had with him since that afternoon, suggested that he knew what he was doing. He has not theorized it. He has not turned it into a lesson or a method or a thing that could be bottled and taught. He cleaned the floor. She was there. He sat with her. The rest of it was her doing, not his. She decided to lean in. She decided to trust. She decided slowly and over time to allow herself back into the world. He just did not stand in the way of it. I want to be honest about what this cost me. Not the specialists, though the cost of 11 specialist teams across 4 years is not nothing, and I am not above feeling the small sting of that. What it cost me was the idea of myself as a person who could fix this. I am good at fixing things. I am good at finding the correct tool for the correct problem. I had 4 planets of resources and the most sophisticated grief support infrastructure on any inhabited world in this region of space, and I could not find the correct tool for this particular problem. And in the end, the correct tool was a man with a standard issue mop and a tuneless work song that he probably doesn't even know he's doing. There is something humbling in that. Not crushing, I have made peace with it or begun to, but humbling, the kind of humbling that is useful if you let it be. I am Empress. I can requisition armies. I can redirect the economic output of entire provinces. I can write my name on a document and change the lives of 10,000 people before lunch. I can do all of these things, and I could not sit on the floor with my own daughter in the right way. He could. He had learned it the hard way, the only way it can actually be learned, which is by doing it in the dark with no one watching and no institutional support, and nothing to guide you except the child in front of you and what she needs. He had learned it on transit station floors, in whatever narrow quarters they gave refugee families, in the outer reaches where the medical care is limited and the administrative support is absent, and the thing you are trying to do for the person you love most has no official name, and therefore cannot be helped or evaluated or measured. He had learned it from Yeva. I keep coming back to Yeva. He raised her alone. He took her through her grief. He went through the outer territories and then through transit after transit with her until she was grown and certificated and settled. And then he ended up here, alone, cleaning floors and carrying this knowledge he hadn't asked for and couldn't do anything with except the specific thing he did with it on a Tuesday afternoon in my corridor. I think about what it means to carry that kind of knowledge, to carry it in your hands, the way he carries everything, in the texture of how you move, in the instinct that puts your hand somewhere before your mind has made a decision. It is not knowledge that can be performed. It is not even, strictly speaking, knowledge. It is more like having learned a particular kind of fluency in a language that most people are never required to speak. He speaks it. He speaks it the way he cleans floors, competently, without ceremony, without requiring any recognition for the doing of it. I had the intake records sent to me after our conversation. His full file, his work history, his medical clearance, the skills assessment they do on entry. The skills assessment had noted him as proficient in mechanical repair, physically capable, consistent worker, low risk, no notable social flags. The assessor had written in the notes field, quiet type gets the work done. Quiet type gets the work done. I held that paper for a while. There are a lot of things I could have done with what I know now. I could have built a program around him, identified other workers with similar histories, similar kinds of hard-won presence, and matched them with children in the court who needed exactly this. I thought about it. I have a mind that goes naturally toward structure and scale, and it went there almost immediately. I could see the shape of the program, the selection criteria, the training model, the documentation. And then I stopped, because the thing the program would be trying to replicate is the thing that disappears when you try to replicate it. You cannot certify what he has. You cannot train it in a semester or give it a rank. The reason it worked is that it was not a method. The program would produce people who had learned a version of the approach and were aware that they were using it, and that awareness would be the thing that made it not work. The door opens when it opens. You just have to be on the other side of it without requiring anything. So I did not build the program. I kept him on the corridor rotation. He is still there, 2 mornings a week, Thursday and Monday. He will be there this coming Thursday. Saravane will appear as she always appears, and she will help with the parts she can help with, and they will talk about whatever they are talking about this week, which the last time I listened from around the corner was something to do with the absorption properties of the newer floor treatment formula versus the older one, and whether the difference in drying time was a net advantage or a disadvantage in practice. She had an opinion about this. He disagreed with part of it, and they were in the middle of working it out. I listened for about 2 minutes. Then I went on to my meeting, because I had a day to run and 4 planets worth of things requiring my attention, and she was all right. She was all right. There is one more thing I want to put in this record, and then I will close it. A few weeks ago, Saravane asked me, at the meal table, who Ren Falca was before he came here. She asked it the way children ask things when they have been thinking about something for a while, not suddenly, but arriving at it as though the question had been there for some time, and she had finally decided it was all right to say it out loud. She knew his name by then. She had known it for a long time, I suspect, in the way she knows most things quietly, without announcing it. I told her what I knew. Not everything. There are things in a person's file that belong to them and not to a 12-year-old's curiosity, however well-intentioned. But the broad shape of it, the repair work, the outer reaches, the transit stations, his daughter. She was quiet for a moment after I'd finished. Then she said, his daughter is the same as me, sort of. I said, in some ways, yes. She was quiet again. Then she said, do you think that's why he knew? And I said, yes, I think that's exactly why. She thought about this. She looked at the table, then out the window at the eastern garden where the late-season planting was finishing, and then back at me. She had the expression she gets when she is working something out, not calculation, which has a different look on her but genuine thinking, the kind that goes somewhere it hasn't been before. Then she said, I'm glad he came here. And I said, so am I. I did not say, I have been glad every day since that Tuesday. I did not say, there is a specific weight that has been sitting in my chest since the 43rd day after your father died, and it is not gone. It will not be gone for a long time, possibly for the rest of my life, but it is different now. It has shifted into a shape I can carry rather than a shape that carries me. I did not say, watching you through that corridor that afternoon was the most grateful I have ever been for anything, in a life that has given me considerable things to be grateful for, and I have been unable to put it into words until now, and possibly I still haven't. I did not say any of that because she is 12 and it would have been too much, and because I say those things here instead. In the record no one will read until I am gone. She said, I'm glad he came here. And I said, so am I. He was back on Thursday. He is there now at the other end of the corridor, and Saravane is helping him. I can hear them talking. I cannot make out the words, but the rhythm of it is the one I know, two people talking about something practical, something real, something that is not about grief at all, and therefore, perhaps for that reason, allows grief to sit quietly in the room alongside them without requiring anyone to look at it directly. I have my meeting in 11 minutes. I will close this record now and fold it into my sleeve and carry it until I find the right place for it. The right place, I think, is somewhere it will be found later by someone who needs to know that these things happen. That a man with a mop and oil-rough hands and a tuneless work song came to a corridor on a Tuesday afternoon and did what 11 specialists in 4 years could not do, and then declined the formal reward, and went back to the floor he hadn't finished. That it is possible to know the right thing to do and not know that you know it. That the knowledge lives in the hands,